So once again, good evening and welcome to St. Martin's Church. This is the first time that the bulk of Susan Carr's work has been seen in one place. And I was her husband we were together for 17 years, we were married for 10 years. And I was closely involved with the work that she did on the 15 acrylic paintings that are around in the window alcoves. But the quilts, which are something that I think, the combination of the two is quite extraordinary to see them together. They've never been seen together before. They were all done more than 10 years before Susan and I got together. So these were all things that I knew that they existed, but I wasn't involved in those. And then in the intervening years, there's some other work which is on public display. Well, there are two major works which are on public display in two hospitals. One of the paintings here, if you've looked at the paintings of the Gledhow Valley Woods that are along this wall, the first one, the spring painting, she reproduced as a cross-stitch tapestry in double size, and that's hanging in the breast clinic at the Leeds General Infirmary. And then there was another large tapestry, it commemorates the original Wharfdale Hospital, which was the former workhouse, which was demolished to build a new hospital in about 2004 or 5, I think. And Susan photographed everything and made a big tapestry just documenting the whole history of the building. So those were the kind of works that she was doing when I first got to know her. And then she moved on to the acrylic paintings. And the paintings of Gledhow Valley Woods kind of commemorate her very strong relationship with that place. She walked there 2 or 3 times a week for more than 40 years. She moved to Leeds in 1978 after finishing her art degree at Newcastle University. And very shortly after that, she embarked on her first professional career as a quilter. She made she was a textile artist, but quilts were her main medium. She did also tapestries and embroidery and other things. So I met her in 1998, so about 20 years after she moved to Leeds. I was in the first director of the Janman Buddhist Centre in Leeds, and she started coming. We actually met in Holy Trinity Church, Ball Lane, because I was leading meditations there. And she came to one of those lunchtime meditations. She was kind of crossing over at the time from Christianity to Buddhism, but then she partially crossed back. So for the last 10 years of her life, she and I sang in the choir together in this church, so we both combined Buddhism and Christianity. But Susan always wanted to go one better, so she also combined Hindu Tantra and Sufism as well as those two. So she was practicing seriously in 4 different spiritual traditions towards the end of her life. And these works are influenced by all of those and more. Some people have commented on the strong influence of Islamic art and patterns. She studied that quite deeply, and also was interested in Kabbalah, so the mystical traditions of all the major religions she was quite involved with, and they influenced her art very strongly. So she was a contemplative person, I think, from the word go. Pippa has described to me, she said one of her earliest memories at the age of 6 was spending, several hours looking at a flower or something. She was that kind of person, very deep, very, she described herself as an introvert. She was quite a private person, but very, deeply into contemplative life. And her art is very meditative and contemplative, as you've seen. I could speak for hours and hours about her work and how it relates to her spirituality, but we don't have time to do that. I'm going to hand over in a minute to these three wonderful artists who all, well, I think Shaeron didn't know Susan, but I think Susan knew some of Shaeron's work actually. But they all have a connection, and they're all artists who have a very strong spiritual perspective, which is very, in my opinion, very aligned with Susan's. I mean, they will speak about that. So I'm so happy that we've got this sort of little group here to explore this theme of the connection between spirituality and art, and in such a beautiful setting. So happy that many more people than I had feared have come to see this exhibition and made very generous, lovely comments. So please, if you're moved to do so, please do write in the book at the back, because those, comments will, they're very meaningful to me and to all the people that knew Susan. Anything else to say before I hand over? I'm going to leave it at that and hand over to Pippa is going to speak first. So Pippa was one of Susan's closest friends for many, many years, and is an artist herself, and she has given me tremendous help with this exhibition. I'm really extremely grateful. It couldn't have happened as it has without Pippa's help. So please, Sue, over to you, Pippa.
Right, and I am modelling one of Sue's waistcoats, because she had a whole period of her life where she almost set up a company making clothes inspired by folk traditions. And she really wanted to sell and make clothes, but she didn't. That never really took off. But this, thankfully, has been hidden away in my cupboard for a very long time, and I bring it out on times like this. So I'm reading from a script, I'm afraid, because I like to include all the things, and I know I'd forget things I wanted to say, so forgive me that one. I knew Susan from the late 70s, when she first came here, and we both lived in Potternewton since that time. Her final degree show at Newcastle was a massive green and yellow, huge canvas painting, and it was geometric in the colours of the light and shade of a woodland in springtime. And it hung on the wall of our large Victorian house for many, many years. I don't know where it is now, but it's interesting to remember that piece, because many of the works here, you could see the elements of much that was in that huge painting that developed in the work she did over years and years later. It could have been a quilt, but it was actually done in paint. She once described that work, her degree show piece, as obsessive. I'll come back to that. Hold that thought. The question that I've been asked sitting in this exhibition this week the most often by visitors has been, goodness me, how long would it have taken to make those pieces? And second only, but how on earth could she have made a living? I don't think these questions are particularly useful in the context of this discussion, but I will explain a little bit about her process. So we would take photographs, produce what would nowadays be called mood boards, cut up and collage, draw gigantic geometric grids and diagrams, make patterns with coloured pencils, and when everything was exactly as she wanted, and the right colours and all in balance and complete, she would dye fabric to get exactly the colours that she wanted herself and work from that design to make the quilts. So yes, these quilts did take many months, if not years, to make. And I wondered if that was one possible clue to linking spirituality and art making. An activity such as meditation, seen perhaps as a pointless use of time for some people, but to others a route to self-understanding, meaning and wider connection. And if this practice is carried out through repetitive manipulation of materials to produce balance and harmony, with no concern about linear time, is that not seen to be of great value as a life work? And I think we can appreciate that as we look around here. This is at the deepest level, I think, the perspective of the artist. This time, the activity not only influences the maker through the process of making, but creates a physical object, is shared with the community, and lives on. Obsessive? Yes, to many viewers perhaps, looking at the work here. But what a spectacle, and what interesting routes of pondering and exploration the viewing of such work can take us down. It might turn our values and understanding of time inside out, and it also renews our vision. I am challenged to look more closely at the world, as well as thinking about ancient pathways, such as sacred geometry. There's a book I've just been given from her library about sacred geometry here, and another one about mandalas. They're very, very beautiful books. And then on to her concern, or her love of the natural world. And this is the story that David told us. The story that when she was very, very small, possibly even younger than 6, she just sat and lost herself swimming in the colours of the inside of a flower. Many years later in adulthood, I remember her cabbage period. She was amazed by ornamental cabbages, growing them, drawing them, painting them, and photographing them. She was very much an introvert, as David has said. Most of these quilts, made in the 1980s and very early 90s, were made in a period where she simply spent days and days in her studio. The paintings are of the more recent period, most of the ones you see here, from years of wandering in Gledhill Woods, building up these libraries of photographs which she collaged, and analysing them through the lens of the mandala. And the climax of this work is the set of the 5 seasons that are now seen here today. Here's a woman profoundly connected to the natural world, rejoicing in its life, and able to transform her experience into one that we can share through visual delight. Sue was a seeker, a courageous spiritual adventurer in search of meaning and balance. She seemed to be born with some deep understanding of the world, to which perhaps some mystics and artists are connected, and which transcends institutional structures of religion. She learned, as we've heard, from several faiths, and to some degree integrated them through her own practice, through the teachers who she chose at different stages, and through study, including Jungian and other psychotherapeutic theory. It is so tragic that her life was cut short just as she was embarking on an MA course of study in Leeds, finally finding a teacher and a means to explore her understanding of the connection between art and spirituality. I'm intrigued that in one of her notes from the very first term of this study includes the question, how to use textiles as protest now? I think she was looking at old, miners' gala hangings and things like that. I believe she was becoming more political, or wanting to become more political in her art, and who knows where that would have taken her. And at this point, with David's encouragement, I want to say just a little bit about my own work. I didn't get into creativity until my 50s, and when I went to art college. And Susan encouraged me to take that step and mentored me from time to time, both in creative practice and later in psychotherapy as I went on to train as an art therapist. That was such a fruitful partnership, and as she understood my own quest to relate art, spirituality, and everyday life. In May and June this year, I was Artist of the Month at Leeds Church Institute, showing a triptych of felt sculpture. A simple piece in a small office hallway sparked significant conversations and involvements. And it wasn't until that putting up this show last week with David that I suddenly realised how much I had been subconsciously influenced by Susan's work all those years ago. I'm in an early stage of learning about colour, with a fascination with sacred geometry and its possibilities, both now and referencing its extraordinary past. These are fields of speculation only for me, but they were foundational in Susan's mind. She leaves many tantalising wonderings, hints and questions for any artist or spiritual seeker, and I honour her work. I think tonight we will raise a lot more questions than answers, but I think it's really interesting looking for the questions.
Thank you, Pippa. I'm still learning about that partnership, and yes, it's so fascinating to hear, things that I didn't know.
Do you know about the cabbages?
I knew about the cabbages.
Oh, you You too remember the cabbages.
Yes, it's been fascinating. And actually, a number of people who knew her have come to the exhibition and told me things I didn't know, so it's all very interesting. So please, over to you, Shaeron. And I guess this is somebody looking at all of this with fresh eyes, really, because this is new work to you, isn't it?
Yes, I'm a newcomer to Susan's work. Can you hear me? There we go. I've been told that there's a sign at the back for me to speak up, because I have a very quiet voice. Yes, I'm completely new, really, to Susan's work. So thank you for involving me. And I do think I came to your house to see the paintings, didn't I? But I do like the quilts very much, particularly in this setting. I think it works in this environment. Yes, and so the things that strike me first about the work is the use of colour, the use of pattern, and a very strong affiliation with nature as well. And I think that looking at her work, it feels like spirituality was integral to who she was, in the same way that it is for me in my practice as an artist. That they were completely integrated and interrelated. For me, my art practice is part of who I am, and who I am is a person of faith, so they are all one thing. And you can't take one thing away from the other. And I sense that again with Susan. It's all a whole thing. For me, making art is a bit like praying, which sort of connects a bit with what you were saying, Pippa, about it being a very slow, meditative process. And you definitely get that feeling looking at the paintings that they draw you in and through somewhere else. And that use the idea of the mandala, the connection between you and the bigger stuff. I've been doing a project in Bradford, which I'll talk about again in a minute. And one of the things we focused on is noticing small things, but how that tells you a lot about the bigger things as well. And it's that sense of the microcosm and the macrocosm, which we know is one of the ideas behind mandalas. And you can feel that with her attention to detail in all the nature paintings, particularly. So it's interesting to hear about the whole process that went on behind that. Very impressive, actually. And I feel with that she's sort of cultivating something that's known as the attitude of regard by the Desert Fathers, finding God in the small things, so to speak, noticing, being in the moment, seeing the everyday as a sacrament, being in that present moment all the time. It's really, really hugely important. The quilts remind me actually a little bit, although they've got a lot of connections with different cultures around, particularly the Islamic influence, I think, but also that sense of spiritual that you get when you look at an Amish quilt. I don't know whether you know that they're very practical things are Amish quilts. They're just there to cover your bed, but actually they sing. The colour really sings, and it really takes you somewhere else. And I think the spirituality of their community comes through that very practical object that they're making, and I really like that connection, because I think that's a nice simile for us as human beings, because we are spiritual, but we are also bodily, we are physical, and actually there's something about embodiment with our faith and our spirituality that's really important. And really, faith hopefully is practical as well. It's something you apply to your daily life. Yes, so that was my reaction to Susan's work. I was asked to talk a little bit about who I am, so I'll just briefly go backwards and say who I am. So I'm Shaeron, and I'm a practicing artist, and I work in printmaking and installation, and I have a passionate interest in spirituality and creativity, and have done for most of my creative life. For me, it's obvious that art touches something within us, our soul, if you like, and that can't be put into words or explained with logic necessarily. And similarly, art often helps us say things that are unsayable, perhaps. And that sort of spills over into some of the work I do out in the community. So in 2020 I set up something called Recreate with Linda over there, and our aim is to offer art and well-being, and by well-being we mean body, mind and spirit, retreats to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to access that, either because of lack of funds or because they haven't got the transport to get to some nice fancy retreat house out in the countryside. So we go to the community and offer those sort of experiences, which was one of the projects I was talking about in Bradford, is where we do that. And I'm very, very keen on accessible arts. I'm interested by the protesting, because that sort of clicks in a little bit with that idea. Everyone being able to access creativity and have a voice, which clicks with my other job, which is working with disabled adults in an arts and crafts centre. So that's who I am. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Shaeron. Yeah. There's another connection as well, which I'll mention, that Shaeron and Pippa both did a large piece of work for an event that I organised in 2007. So Susan was behind the scenes. She was partly bankrolling it, actually. It didn't make money. And this is the launch of Schumacher North, the Schumacher Lectures. And it was a very wonderful day about peace, ecology and spirituality. And there were two superb installation pieces which Shaeron and Pippa contributed. So although you may not remember Susan, she did notice your work. And yeah, it was a very special day in, well, certainly in my life, but I think it was a bit of a special day in her life as well. My peak moment.
I think it was the peak of my artistic achievement, that one.
It was a really wonderful piece. I absolutely loved both of them, actually. Yeah, so, yeah.
Oh, of course you did. You had an exhibition. Hey, we all had an exhibition.
You went there, yeah, I remember it, because I knew you'd done an exhibition, and then was it the same place? It was the same day. Yeah. So they're all, this is a reunion. Yeah. These are the three Schumacher artists who made part of it, that and Darnbia Singh's sitar performance really framed that day in a very wonderful way, didn't they? Yeah. So yes, well, over to you, Chris, another Schumacher artist. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Well, I've sort of arrived here. It reminds me of the days when I used to teach art, and I arrived with absolutely nothing prepared. And that's partly because, although I knew Susan, and David was kind enough to say that she called me a mentor, which was a surprise and delight this evening. I didn't, in fact, know the work very well at all, but I understood Susan as an extremely studious and spiritual woman, somebody who was troubled and searching with huge intelligence and sensitivity, and also someone who could apply that word faith, which is such a simple but also a very complicated word, that if we could all apply that to life, life would be all the richer. So I've arrived here, probably like a lot of people who don't know the work very well. I mean, David and I met last week at the Buddhist Centre, and we were able to see a few of the paintings with a very, very open mind, particularly sort of seeing the quilts, which I must say are absolutely stunning. And then what interested me was the sort of dichotomy between the prints and the paintings. So I found myself looking for the connections between them, which in some ways are obvious because of the patternation. But in other ways, they're quite different processes.
Yes.
The quilt, you're physically working with the colour and the materials in a very visceral way. And then I found myself looking at the painting and began to understand that the paintings were about pattern and colour, and not necessarily in painterly terms about the application of the paint. Because when I look at the paintings, there isn't the same interest in, say, gestural painting would be in the actual sort of tackist quality of the paint. So I was able instantly to sort of make this connection between the colour and the use of actually working directly with colour. And that put me in mind of Matisse and his paper cutouts when he described himself sort of drawing in colour. So he was just making the cuts directly into the coloured paper. And I think there is a sort of, I'd say, a sort of complicated innocence about both the quilts and the painting. They're sort of innocent and knowing at the same time, which is an extraordinary sort of balance. And I agree with you about the sort of the sort of shaker quality, which is an extraordinary vernacular spiritual quality. And I think that seems to be imbued in these quilts and in African textiles, which are made for use but full of intense meaning and full of significance. So when I was looking around in a bit of a panic this evening, thinking, well, how am I going to kind of join this up in the 10 minutes I've got before everybody comes? Those were the kinds of things I was thinking about. And then this phrase, holding patterns, came into my mind. And I thought that could relate to the quilts and the paintings. And then I thought, well, if they're holding patterns, what are they holding? What's inferred by that? And then I begin to think about I'm a painter, so in painting, when you work, there are different levels of kind of consciousness in the way that you work with the paint. So if you want to make a gestural mark, it's a mark which requires no mind, no self-consciousness whatsoever, and it's a very kind of sophisticated place to get to. But then if you're making, say, a very graphic mark or a line, it's much more conscious. So that within a painting, the way the paint is actually applied implies different levels of sort of consciousness in the artist, which then communicates itself to whoever's looking at the painting. So I was thinking about these paintings in relation to that and holding patterns. And I think the intensity of all the patternation are a way in which Susan held herself for the moments that she was making that painting. And perhaps when other parts of her life were less stable, the quilts and the paintings would offer a moment of stability in makes these extraordinarily poetic and moving artifacts of Susan's search for peace and spirituality, and the poetic expression of that search in these paintings. And for me, that makes them extraordinarily moving artifacts and marvellous things for us to have of Susan's.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and all of you. It is such a special experience for me to hear her work being talked about in this way. I mean, I've known, for a long time that it was very special work. I've come to a new realization of that, seeing it all here together. The quilt at the far end on the right there, when I first hung that out on our washing line about 2 weeks ago and saw it, the only way I could describe it is, I said, my heart stopped. I was absolutely stunned by that piece of work. So for me, it's been a new realization of the depth and skill of her work. And it's very, very special to hear the really interesting and insightful and heartfelt way that you've all responded to that work. So we're going to continue sort of having a little bit of a mini discussion here, and then we'll invite you in. But I'm sure there's a lot more to be said and asked. You've got that little book there, Pippa. Do you want to say anything about the contents of that book?
You can look at this afterwards. It's in the back, the west end of the church. It's almost like a studio. It's the process, it's the sketchbooks, it's the things that led up to the work that she produced, including photographs around the year of the seasons. But we haven't said a lot about mandalas, but she used mandalas as a sort of psychological tool, if you like. I mean, that's somewhere between the conscious and unconscious, with a boundary of a circle and then letting things flow. But these are rather amazing. They're all done just with very high quality crayons, and some of them probably watercolour crayons, I think. But she would do like one a day. I think that's what she's doing here, or maybe one a week.
They're over a period of 8 years, so they're
Yes.
actually quite widely separated. There's 40 different ones. And this is a technique that Carl Jung used as part of his psychotherapeutic practice. He would have his patients just paint freely or draw within a circular boundary, and it's a representation of that person's inner world at that time. He talks about it in his book on alchemy. There's a series of about 30 of these kind of mandalas showing somebody's inner psychic journey. And this is what it was. Sue was a very accomplished Jungian therapist herself. She was very deeply into Carl Jung's work. So this is literally a portrait of Susan's inner world over the years from 2009 to 2017, not long before she died. And they're fascinating. And you can see the one painting that's a little bit similar in style is the one next to the maple leaf. And actually you can see elements of that have come from these free mandala drawings that she did, and she's made it into a very thought out painting. It's a very mystical painting, fascinating piece of work, as I'm sure you probably stopped and looked at it and wondered what it all was. And we both wondered what it was. I discussed it with her, and she didn't really know everything about what it meant. We speculated about what it might mean. But yeah, it's well worth having a look at those little
I think it's
mandalas.
James Hillman, the post-Jungian philosopher and psychologist, just tells us to stick with the image, and that interpretation can sometimes be can throw you off. And I think the other thing I suppose I wanted to say about art in general, it is the silent presence in our lives. And I think sometimes if we try and over-describe it, then you can kind of lose the image in a way.
You're absolutely right.
I don't think that works. I'm not in total agreement in entirety with that, but I think it's a very interesting thing that Helen says. Just stick with the image.
Susan was very deeply into James Hillman as well. Actually, a lot of the commentators on Jung. But when you said that phrase, silent presence, I suddenly felt, whose silent presence is it?
Yeah,
Who's here with us? And her presence here is so strong.
Well, that's the other thing about art, isn't it?
It's powerfully present.
Is that of all the expressive arts, visual art, painting, quilt making, whatever, holds the physical presence of the artist. So it's like being, stood over Beethoven as he's writing the manuscript paper of one of his sonatas. It's like being there, or when you see a Rembrandt or something, you've physically got the artist recorded there in the materials, and so we are unique in that respect, because all the other expressive arts need interpretations and need to be spoken or played.
Just one more comment on that when you talk about the silent presence, in a few of the smaller paintings and in one of the larger ones, the winter painting over there, there's a silhouette of like Susan's shadow from the back, and that's always been, which we did, and that's always kind of resonated very powerfully. There she is, just sort of half visible as a shadow. That's her presence in the room.
But when we looked at that this week, we realised that the shadow should be pointing the other way.
Yes.
There were two line sources.
And I'm sure that's deliberate.
It's artistic license.
Yeah.
I do it all the time.
Didn't Rembrandt do that?
Yeah.
One or two people asked me, suddenly noticed standing at the top, the quilting over the altar, and that was made for this church, wasn't it? But
Yeah.
it's in the possession of the family now.
It
And,
was,
and as is the quilt hanging from the pulpit.
no, they're in possession of the church. They've been in
Oh,
continuous use here.
they are held by the church.
Yes, they've been in
Right.
continuous use for more than 40 years. The altar cloth and I don't know what it's called, the one that's draped over the lectern on the pulpit. So that, again, you can see that they've faded originally from their original glory, but they are still in regular use.
And I was stunned when I walked in on Friday to find that there's a whole box full of cards drawn by Susan's first husband in 1978, and they still haven't sold, but you're very happy to buy any number of them for 10p, but because there is one that is a black and white drawing of that altar cloth on the altar, and there's also a couple of others, but that was a bit of a time warp for me.
I think it's 1983, so it's exactly
83.
40 years ago.
Exactly 40 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. So it'd be nice. I'm sure the church would be delighted if we moved a few of
Yeah,
those.
they would.
I mean, just going back to that point about the nature of sort of visual art and its presence in the world, I think that the other thing that sometimes people aren't as aware of consciously is that every piece of artwork has its own kind of reality, which you engage with when you're in front or you're looking at or you're just with a piece of work, And I used to say to students, so you take students to the National Gallery, and they go into a room, want to be absolutely exhausted, and go straight to the canteen after 20 minutes. And I used to say to them, well, it's because every time you put yourself in front of a particular work of art, you enter a very, very strong imaginative reality which you engage with, so that each individual work has its own reality. So if you're in a museum and you're dealing with 15 of those great masterworks and you're in the reality of it, it's absolutely extraordinarily exhausting. And I used to plead with the students just to look at one or two paintings in a room and then go to the next room and rest. And so I think that imbued in these works of Susan's are that reality as well. So they still cast that strong reality, her reality, her inner reality, and the poetry of that very, very strongly.
Yes, I think that there was but with the finished paint, especially the later paint, I'm looking at from right now at the snow painting in that alcove, which was the last finished piece of work, last finished artwork. And when I look at that, reality jumps out. The scene is so real. You're absolutely there. It feels cold looking at it.
But it's also multidimensional, isn't it?
Yes.
This is the other thing.
Yeah.
So that you're not given an easy view of Caton Woods by any means. You're taken on a journey which is about time and place.
That's absolutely right.
It's
each
a
of those
through a
paintings
looking glass. Caton Woods through a
it
looking
is
glass.
a journey through the woods. Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're all very accessible. I mean, we could talk about them all night, and we're not going to, don't worry. But somebody can walk in and just enjoy these. They're not kind of...
Yes, they're not obscure.
Not obscure.
Yeah.
You can work on them and find out more and more, but you can just walk in and just enjoy.
Shaeron, if you're looking at the little Vandals, I'm fascinated to hear your reaction to any
Well,
of those.
like you say, the only painting that's up is the one over there that really relates.
That's the only painting
This is
she
a-
did on
it's a
any
very
scale
strong-
that's of that nature, yes.
Well, they're
Yeah.
intensely personal, aren't
They
they?
are,
Maybe it was
they are.
too much to...
It's like, like looking at someone's diary and reading
Absolutely.
something
Yeah,
there
what's
that's
and all
secret.
kind of-
Yes, it really is. It's everything. Quite a brave thing to do, actually, visually.
She was a very brave woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, serious about her journey.
Yes, we'll pass it around. If anyone would like to have a look. Susan's in a journal. Yeah. Any other thoughts leaping to mind from any of you before we hand over to everybody else? Is it time to do that?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody like to jump in with a question or a comment or anything at all that you'd like to say?
What will happen to all of this work now?
That's a very good question, and the answer at the moment is that we don't know. I was expecting until quite recently that this would be the last opportunity to see all this work together, because owing to the circumstances of her death, there was some legal difficulty between me and her son, who was not my son, and I put forward the proposal that all these works are placed in trust, so that they continue to be seen by the public. But at the time, he didn't want that to happen. So I had 5 years, eventually it was agreed I would have 5 years in which I would be able to mount exhibitions of this kind. And that runs out on the 4th of August this year. However, I won't go into details, but I'm now considerably more optimistic that we may be able to continue exhibiting the works. Some people have come and said they should be on the permanent display. There is a problem with the quilts, because the quilts were, except for the one over there, they are all hand-dyed by Susan herself, with dyes that she believed were completely colour fast, but they aren't. And so some of the quilts, the one that's hanging over the brass rail over there, for instance, was hung up in our living room for many years, and the colours have faded considerably. I think it would be better for that and other reasons if we could continue having occasional shows of this kind. The church is ideal because there's not very much light here, so the quilts are not suffering from this environment. Maybe we should just have them once a year in St Martin's Church. I don't know. But we are trying to bring it about that they will continue to be able to be seen. I'm also, I think I've actually come to the point of deciding that I want to create a book of her work, because looking at it here, we see these large works which are very impressive, and then at the back there's a kind of collection of small bits and pieces. But if it was made into a book, they'd all be reproduced in the same size, so you would see a very large body of work of extremely varied kind, over a 40-year career. And there's so much to say about all of them. So that's what I'm going to try and do. I'm photographing all the works as we go along. I'm going to also probably get as many as I can professionally photographed and scanned. And then I will continue writing about them. I've written pieces about just the acrylic paintings, which you've seen. But I will also invite my friends here and other people to write and contribute. And hopefully we can have a really good permanent record of her work, because I am finally convinced, as I have believed for many years, I'm finally convinced she was a major artist, and this work should continue to be available to everyone. Thank you for that question.
She did trawl around a lot of galleries in a certain period, about 20 years ago, and was very discouraged that people were not interested, and I think it was mainly the kind of pattern and nature painting was simply not in fashion. I mean, I don't know, you know more about this. And I got a sort of sense that these days there would be a lot more interest. Would you say that was true or not?
It's always difficult to say in the fickle art world. I wouldn't attempt to put any kind of lid on that. I don't know. I mean, I think they're very beautiful, and I think beauty always wins through. I mean, I think the quilts particularly are extraordinary things, paintings, sculptures. So I think they would grace any place, any gallery. But the art world is still not. I had a long conversation with somebody yesterday about it, and we still, all we could say is we don't know. Don't know. So, I mean, I think it just comes down to people's individual relationships with the works, and I don't think that's where they... I mean, in some sense, wherever you hang these works, they're going to communicate the truth of themselves. So I think they're kind of portable in that respect. So, yeah, it's difficult to say. I mean, I can't imagine people not being interested in them, but then the art world's not like that.
It is very fickle, and I don't know whether this kind of thing is fashionable or not, but I think it's a question of, persevering, keep knocking on doors, building relationships, and over time they will get traction, and they will get interest, and they will eventually,
Yeah, I
reach
mean,
more
that's
people.
why, we were talking about Instagram being a way of drawing people towards the work, and then doors open through that. I think if you hashtag things correctly, you will draw in people who are interested in that kind of thing. And when things do happen.
I think there's lots of strategies that we can use to
That's one of the easiest, because it doesn't cost anything. You can go world around.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try and put together a website and start working on a book. That's my next plan.
I think there's legs in looking at spaces like this. So looking outside of the traditional art world spaces.
Absolutely.
I think the quilts really work well in this space. I think the other thing is that going back to 20 years ago, that in those days you wouldn't accept this as fine art. Sorry, I'm being quiet again. It wouldn't be accepted as a gallery piece because it's craft. Whereas I think now there's a much more open-minded approach to that. So I think the quilts have got some more,
Traction. They've got more traction.
Yeah, in that sense. Yeah.
Any more comments?
I'm interested in what you were saying about how some of the dyes used aren't necessarily light fast, so that they might fade or change over time. And I on the one hand, that can be really sad because things lose their luster, or they change, and they literally fade away. But it's one of the things I really like about textile art and other types of transient art, I suppose, is that they change. They don't stay static from the point of creation. Even though it's a finished quilt, every time you take it out of a storage box, the wrinkles change slightly.
Yeah.
And they hang differently, and if you have to wash it, then it just... But I think that's a really beautiful thing, and it's just... But thinking in terms of what you were saying about her faith and her spirituality, and it being a meditative practice, but the idea of, from what you're saying about her spirituality, and it's very much a practicing spirituality, and that is not a static thing itself. Faith and the spirituality was not a static, fixed thing there. It was a transformative thing. It was an ongoing, developing thing. And I really like how that's all reflected in the fact that these are, even if they're finished, even if they might be kept in storage, they're never going to be fixed, static things. And I just wondered what you thought of that from both an artistic and a spiritual point of view.
I think it's a very pertinent comment, and you're just reminding us of the Buddha's fundamental teaching of impermanence, which was something that was very much in the forefront of Susan's world. I think that theme is very present in a lot of the work here. Some of the paintings that are unfinished, at the time of her death, and others where some of the quilts are very faded and others look very pristine because they haven't been taken out of the cupboard. Yeah, I think that's quite a significant part of how she would think about it. Yes, she would understand that. Yeah. And of course there will always be a permanent sort of, digital record of the photographs so people can see the original colours, but as you say, as they age, they change their meaning.
And their presence, potentially.
Yeah.
And if they don't come out of the box, no one sees them. So
What's the point?
what's the point?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that.
Pragmatic,
I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great. I'm torn between, go with it, and actually seeing these as I saw them 40 years ago or 30, whenever. Like the one in the third arch of the yellow and green trees.
Which you may not have realised they are trees because they're very subtly portrayed.
Is actually in our garden because Sue lived in the flat above at the top of our house. And I'm just so sad looking at that because they are 2 chestnut trees, one of which doesn't exist anymore, in full autumn glory with a sumac bush in the middle in brilliant. I don't know what it is about the red dye. The red dye must have really faded fast. And I was thinking, oh, it's so sad it's not there again. But, looking at it through the lens that you describe is, it's another way of looking
I
at it.
love how gentle and soft those colours are
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful now, but I can actually remember it, how it was,
Well,
And
I think it's
but
absolutely
then that's
marvellous.
life, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's new to me. And,
Yeah.
and it doesn't, what it looked like before makes no difference to
No.
me
Yeah.
at all.
Exactly, yeah.
Same. Yeah.
So,
I haven't seen the watercolour painting of the trees, which is at the back
Oh,
somewhere.
right. Is that linked?
Yes,
Yes,
it
it's
is,
that.
it's-
It's on the back on the
Oh,
painting of the
right.
same
on the right
trees.
side, on the far left
Yeah.
corner
Oh,
of the
yeah.
picture.
Very good.
Mm.
So I'm really very keen to hear your reactions and thoughts. So please do speak up and ask or speak away. Because I know that everyone has said that these things have made an impact. So please let's. Yes, Shaeron at the back.
Well, I think they're beautiful. I mean, I've seen a couple of bits in your house before, but it's really nice to see them all together. It was just a little thing really, but looking at that one in the corner there, it reminds me, I don't know if you've been in Salts Mill, the kind of Hockney's winter journey, where he's got the kind of 9 screens where you put them all in the car and he's driving along the road and you see the different kind of views of the kind of winter and the snow and the trees there. I don't know if that would have been an influence for her or if...
We went very often to
Jane,
Salts Mill together, and she was a big fan of Hockney. I'm trying to remember the paintings. Is it a series of the same trees at different times of year?
And not paintings, he has like a video of, he's put 9 cameras on I don't know, some kind of vehicle and it's driving along, so you're seeing the kind of trees moving.
Is it new?
It was at the
yeah,
Tate
it's
one.
fairly new, isn't it?
They had the 4 seasons, and you sat in the middle, and the 4 different sets ran around you. Presumably at Salts, they've just got one of them up.
Yeah, I've only seen the winter one.
Yeah, but was his big retrospective at Tate? I can't remember when it was. It would be maybe a decade or more ago.
It's just interesting with you talking about that one being like a journey. I think that's, the shapes are beautiful in that one. It's
Yes, I think we went to that. There was a major retrospective of about 300 Hockney works, sort of about 10 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. We went to, I think it was 2015 or 2016, something like that. Yeah, I mean, that would be an interesting question. If somebody could detect the influence of Hockney and other artists, but Hockney was certainly quite a strong influence. We went often to Salts Mill and she spoke a lot about him. She was a big fan. Other artists. But I think her 2 favourite artists were probably Louise Bourgeois and I'm trying to remember the name of the other. There's an artist who is she's a Christian nun, and very mystical.
Hildegard.
Pardon?
Hildegard.
No, the 20th. She was a big fan of Hildegard, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, a contemporary artist. She wrote a book called Crow Mother and the Dog God.
I can't remember the
You
name,
know who I'm talking
but
about.
she's American. isn't she?
American.
In the Mexican desert or something.
Yes.
Wonderful book.
Georgia O'Keeffe as well was another favourite. These are the kind of artists that she was deeply into. Yeah. Yes, Paul.
I was just thinking with regards to archiving the work, perhaps the art world isn't the right pursuit, and it should be more crafts museums and textiles museums, specifically for the tapestries, or the quilt work, sorry. That kind of route might be a bit more work better.
Well, people have spoken about that, and I think that they certainly should be represented there, but I personally would be very keen to see them not just, categorised as craft. I think they are art as well, with a capital A, as far as I'm concerned, and I would be willing to campaign.
That's something any of us can go home and do now. Nobody else is going to see it. Just fill a circle with colour and then do another one the next day and the next day and the next day. And it was little practices like that I think she sort of spread far and wide. So,
Yes, she had quite big ambitions with that. She wanted to go on doing those workshops, and that was a big part of her practice was to do with sharing her art and exploring through sort of discussion and workshops about what it means in terms of not just something to look at in a box separated from the rest of life, but how art actually transforms you through your experience. So that is another sort of tragedy really about her early death, is that would have reached a lot more people with the plans that she had. So it feels like we're naturally drawing to a close. Any last comments or anyone? No.
I did have
Yes.
I was just wondering if you know if there's a piece or a few that she really liked that she produced.
The snow painting was one that she worked with very intensely on and poured a lot of herself into. That was a very special piece for her. I've got a feeling that the maple leaf was quite special. It feels like very much a sort of trademark of hers, that one. And I personally feel that the large mandala that's on the easel was one that was a particularly special one.
It's by where you walk in, you might not have noticed it when you first walked in.
Yeah.
There's a quilt hanging below the flowers and a mandala on the easel.
Those are paintings that she put a lot of herself into and spent a long time doing. So I think those ones were pretty special. As far as the quilts are concerned, I don't know, but for me, the Winter Reflection quilt, which is the one, the last one on this side towards the back, that says to me that was one that she cared a lot about. To me, I think it's her finest work, actually. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a very special experience for me this whole week, and I'm so thrilled that so many people have come and seen the paintings and the reactions that people have given. If you do want to write something in the book, that would be very much appreciated. And once again, thank you so much to our wonderful artists and everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.